I will invite you to go ahead and open your Bible up to the book of Proverbs, chapter 6. And we will begin picking up our notes there. We're going through the book of Proverbs, and we're calling it God's Handbook on Parenting. And think about the family as the building block of any society. Our children are precious. God gives us a way to train them in His good will to prepare them for life and eternity. Marriages. Every once in a while, you will get to a place in your marriage where you struggle. And it gets to be difficult. Push through that. Get through that. Do not listen to the voices in our world that treat that as though if it's not making you happy, you just go and do something else with someone else. That is not God's way. It will not bless our children. It will not fit God's pattern. It will be devastating, and you will find out that you'll run into many of the same problems with the next person, and the next person, and the next person. God will talk about marriage in our study in the book of Matthew, and we'll have some things to say about some exceptions along the way. But the rule is one man, one woman for life. Give your home stability. Bring that blessing to your children. And if you find yourself in some of those difficult places of life, I'll tell you how to get through it. If you're a man, strive to be God's man. Whatever that difficulty is you're facing at home, strive to be God's man, draw closer to God. If you're the wife, strive to be God's woman. Try as hard as you can to draw closer to God in that situation. And what you'll find out is as husband and wife, you will draw closer to each other in the process of that. You'll get through those things. When we give up trying to be God's man or God's woman and we stop our growth toward God, we will drift away from our spouse as well. And it will be destructive to the home. Well, think about now in our study of the book of Proverbs, God's Handbook on Parenting, how we're following that phrase, my son. We're following that through the book. We have the lesson tonight, and then next Sunday we'll have one more lesson in the book of Proverbs. That will give you your good solid foothold in this kind of study. You can pursue that on your own in your study of Proverbs, and we'll move on to some other things in our Sunday night series after that. But for now, we're following this phrase, my son, and we're seeing how it introduces various topics in the book of Proverbs. It's filled with information on parenting, giving our children, our marriages, our families, God's design for life. Our main discussion tonight, get this, our main discussion tonight is about finances. And you think, well, okay. There are pitfalls in life. There are things that will ambush us, things that will derail us. And how we think about finances and our work ethic in life matters to all of that. So here we are, and we're thinking about a father training his son, about parents training their children, and preparing them for life. And there's going to be a discussion about this sort of thing. And it's got an odd place in the book of Proverbs. Chapter 5, last week, we talked a lot about sexual immorality issues. And when you get to the end part of chapter 6, you're going to pick up with that again. If you notice chapter 6, verse 24, to keep you from the evil woman, from the smooth tongue of the adulteress. And it goes right back into that theme. And if you look at chapter 7, it continues that. The heading in my Bible at chapter 7 is the wiles of the harlot. So you have it in chapter 5, you have it at the end of chapter 6, you have it continuing in chapter 7, but in chapter 6, the beginning of that, there's a break in that discussion. So you put that on pause and you talk about this, and the question is why? What sense does it make to talk about it in chapter 5, talk about it at the end of chapter 6, again in chapter 7, but somewhere in the middle of that, beginning of chapter 6, you have this pause in that subject material, and you have something else, almost like a detour. Does it make sense? Yes, it does. There is a sensible place for that in our reading tonight. And then we'll talk about a few other things in chapter 6, verses 12 through 19. I want to give you a few related words and ideas that we're going to run across. Back in chapter 1, verses 10 through 19, we were learning about how we need to choose our friends very carefully. Chapter 1, verse 10, "My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent." Verse 15, "My son, do not walk in the way with them. Keep your feet from their path." Chapter 1, verse 18, "But they lie in wait for their own blood. They ambush their own lives." Be careful about the friends that you choose. And what we're reading about from chapter 1 forward is all these pitfall places in life. These are things that can ambush you and send you the wrong direction. So we're going through the book and we're reading about all of those. Our children are going to venture into their own independence at some point. When they're at home with us, during their upbringing, what we call their rearing, while they're in that phase, we are marking a trail for them. We're showing it to them in our own lives, and then we're teaching them about it. And we're showing them where to walk and where it's safe and where to go and where not to go. Eventually, they'll make their own decisions. In the meantime, we're supplying them with information to make wise choices so they can begin doing that when they get out of the home and on their own. Just as you would stop your child, if they were about to run into a busy street, you'd hold your arm out and you'd stop them and you would save their life. So we should armor them up for life and eternity. There is an underlying theme that we're looking at as we go through the book of Proverbs about these things that can be pitfalls, that can capture us, that can snare us in life. First one was wrong friendships. And then we learn about things where we could actually ambush ourselves. We could lay a snare for ourselves. Chapter 5, verse 22, "His own iniquities will capture the wicked." Chapter 6, verse 2, "If you have been snared with the words of your mouth," if you've been caught with the words of your mouth, you did it to yourself. Then we read in chapter 6, verses 24 and 25, we read verse 24 a minute ago, there is sexual immorality that can capture your life, to keep you from the evil woman, from the smooth tongue of the adulteress. Do not desire her beauty in your heart. Do not let her capture you with her eyelids. And by the way, there's a counterpart to that woman. We've mentioned that before. There's also that kind of guy who's on the prowl looking for his next vulnerable woman. Sometimes women they get in their head a harlequin romance kind of theme. And they get disappointed sometimes at home. And they think, well, and then here's this guy going to pay all this attention to them. Don't get captured by that. Get out of the romance novels. Think about life as God has designed it. And so there is a male counterpart to what Solomon is warning his son about. We have an undercurrent theme then, from chapter 1 all the way through to this point, of things that can capture us. And there is a preventative for that. That word capture that we read in chapter 6, verse 25. That word capture, or the word snare, sometimes it's translated a little bit differently. There is a positive side to that word. If you look at it in chapter 1 and verse 3, it's translated with the word receive. But you could put the word capture there, and it would serve just as effectively. To receive instruction, to capture wise instruction, wise behavior, righteousness, justice, equity. Receive that, capture that. He's telling his son, capture that, receive it, take it in. Grab a hold of it and hold on to it. Chapter 2, verse 1, my son, if you receive my words, if you capture them, capture my words, hold on to them, and treasure my commandments within you. Chapter 4, verse 10, hear my son and accept. Here the word is translated accept, but that's the same word translated capture. Hear my son and accept or capture my sayings, and the years of your life will be many. So we want to fill the bag of our children for life before these difficult choices confront them in their adult being. And there are things they need to capture along the way that will equip them. So you have the preventative, positive side of that, things our children need to capture while they're at home, while mom and dad are training them, while we're filling them up with the Word of God, showing them the way to go, marking the trail. We want them to capture certain things. And then when they get out into life, they call those up and use those, hopefully, to make the best choices that they can. And all of that begins very young. And the key ingredient here is parents who become a fountain of God's instruction and God's example. Now I want to get into this theme of finances in chapter 6. It is another snare, and that's how it ties in with our theme. He's been talking about this, that, and the other thing, and now in chapter 6, he's talking about another one of those things that can capture, that can snare, that can derail a life, and it has to do with indebtedness. There's a pause in the discussion about sexual purity, and he is continuing the theme of things that can entrap someone. He talks about debt in verses 1 through 5. Then he talks about a very connected thing in verses 6 through 11. That's about sloth. That's about laziness. They kind of go together, indebtedness and laziness. They sort of connect with each other. And then in verses 12 through 15, he talks about an antisocial behavior. And we'll show how those things, debt, sloth, antisocial behavior, all connect. And he's warning his son now about extending himself financially in a way that traps him in debt. Verses 1 through 5. My son, if you have become surety for your neighbor, have given a pledge for a stranger. If you've been snared with the words of your mouth, have been caught with the words of your mouth, do this then, my son, deliver yourself. Since you've come into the hand of your neighbor, go humble yourself and importune your neighbor. Give no sleep to your eyes, no slumber to your eyelids. Deliver yourself like a gazelle from the hunter's hand and like a bird from the hand of the fowler. So you got yourself into this mess. What are you going to do with it now? You work at that. Don't stop working at that. Get yourself out of that situation. Learn a lesson from what you got yourself into. Don't go there anymore. But you do not sleep. You do not slumber. You do not hesitate to work and get your way out of that. You go talk to your neighbor, the one who's got this bill hanging over your head. You put yourself into this situation. You get after that, and you don't rest until you're out of it. And then stay away from that sort of thing. Don't get tied up with that again. This could be things like co-signing for a loan that you can't afford. Could be about credit card debt. Could be about taking out loans to have your heart's desire. And you take out all these loans and you end up upside down in things, and now you're in trouble. It's what I call and you've heard this phrase before, play now, pay later culture, where we want all these things. And the desire of the moment doesn't look far enough down the road to see how massive the day of reckoning is. I remember when I was a kid growing up that I used to hear about this kind of loan. And I suppose it's still around today. I don't know. I don't deal with that sort of stuff. A balloon payment loan. You heard of that? You have a big loan you take out, and you pay a little bit, and you pay a little bit, and all the payments are low. All the payments are low. They're very reasonable. You're paying interest is what you're paying. And then at the end comes the balloon payment, the great big payment. Now you got to come up with that. It's different from all the other payments, and the day of reckoning is there. How many lives, how many marriages have been destroyed over money pressures? When you start dealing with that in the home, you start bickering with one another, and you start fussing and fighting over things, and it can destroy you. I looked for the Dave Ramsey report, and I found it. December of this past year, the one we just got out of. December of 22. And he talked in this report about the average American debt. And it was staggering, the numbers that he came up with. Total personal debt in the United States is $14.96 trillion. The average American debt per U.S. adult, if you're married, multiply it by 2. The average American debt per U.S. adult, $58,604. 77% of American households have at least some kind of debt. The average debt per household was at $158,209. Credit card debt per household, and this is credit card debt that is not paid off each month. That's that one that just keeps hanging on that credit card statement all the time, and you don't get it paid off. $14,241. That's all the impulse buying, going out to eat, taking vacations we can't afford, getting all this stuff that we think we just have to have. And then Dave Ramsey went on to talk about student loans, auto loans, mortgage loans. The total personal debt in the United States at the close of 2022 was at an all-time high. The Bible has a bunch of passages talking about this kind of thing. Luke 12, verse 15, then he said to them, beware and be on your guard against every form of greed. For not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of his possessions. But in the play now, pay later culture, everybody thinks their life does consist of all the things they possess. That's how they measure their life today. And there's a warning in the Bible about that. There's a warning in Proverbs 6 about that sort of thing. Luke 12, verses 20 and 21, God said to him, you fool, this very night your soul is required of you, and now who will own what you have prepared? So is the man who stores up treasure for himself, but is not rich toward God. Another familiar passage is in 1 Timothy 6 and verse 17. Even if you have plenty of money, even if you have that big bank account, instruct those who are rich in this present world not to be conceited or to fix their hope on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly supplies us with all things to enjoy. Matthew 6, verses 19 through 21, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, where thieves do not break in or steal. For where your treasure is, and that's the most important thing, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. 2 Timothy 4:10, the Apostle Paul recorded that Demas, having loved this present world, has deserted me. People who love this present world will desert their brethren. They're the ones who could be in the assembly, but they're not, because they're off doing something in the world instead. They will desert their brethren. The text in Proverbs 6, verses 3 through 5 begins, "Do this then, my son." If you find yourself in that position, the financial issue has you by the throat. Do this then, my son. You begin to remedy that situation. Don't stop. You exert great zeal. You do so until it's done. You wanted something so bad that you put yourself in that position to have it, and now look where you're at and you're in trouble. So learn from that, get out of it, and don't go back there again. And a key word in verse 3 is humble yourself. You have to humble yourself to do that. Did you ever own anything you really couldn't afford? Were you humble enough to sell it and get rid of it? I've been there. I've been in those kinds of situations where thought I needed this, realized I didn't need that. Got rid of that, got an old or something. We need to be able to humble ourselves in those situations. Don't let pride keep us in those positions. We're teaching our children about stewardship. We're teaching them about humility. We're creating in them the ability to learn. We teach them to look down the road. We allow them to suffer consequences when they're young, when those things don't matter so much, and then they learn. They need to learn the price of $1. They need to learn about hard work. They need to learn about saving. They need to learn about bookkeeping a little bit, just a little, when they're young, but teach them as they're growing up more and more. So, if Johnny gets a quarter for his allowance or for doing some chore around the house, whether it's a quarter, $1, $5, or $10, doesn't matter. And you teach Johnny that if you save this, and then you save the next one, and you save the next one, and the next one, pretty soon you're going to have enough. We're going to go on vacation, and you're going to have all this money in your pocket, and you can do this or you can do that. Yours to spend. And if Johnny doesn't save the quarter, and he spends it, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and then it comes to vacation time, and he wants to go off and get this, that, and the other thing, tell him no. That's what we were talking to you about. That's what we were talking to you about. And now let him learn the lesson. Let him suffer the consequences of that. And when he gets older, he'll understand that. Let them invest in things. Don't just buy everything for them. Let them earn. Let them have a personal investment in things, so they don't get themselves in this sense of entitlement where it's all supposed to be handed to them, and if they get themselves in a mess, somebody's supposed to bail them out. Teach them when they're young. Teach them that good, godly work ethic. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verses 10 and 11. For even when we were with you, we used to give you this order: if anyone's not willing to work, then he's not to eat either. For we hear that some among you are leading an undisciplined life, doing no work at all, but acting like busybodies, and then apparently saying, I'm hungry, feed me. Rent's due, pay it. And Paul said, look, if they don't want to work, then they shouldn't eat either. So then he gives an illustration about this work ethic, this godly work ethic. And it is about an ant. So, beginning in verse 6, Go to the ant, O sluggard, observe her ways, and be wise, which having no chief, officer, or ruler, prepares her food in the summer, and gathers her provision in the harvest. How long will you lie down, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep? A little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. Your poverty will come in like a vagabond, and your need like an armed man. That would tie in with the previous verses 1 through 5 about how this individual got themselves so upside down in things. And now, if they're going to be lazy and like a sluggard, well, just go look at an ant. Go look at that little insect and learn a lesson from that. There are some faulty ideas about all of this that, if you get yourself in this overwhelming debt, somehow it's just going to solve itself. It won't. It won't solve itself. There is a day of reckoning that's coming. The idea that we just must have everything we want or that we see other people have, we've got to have it right now. We'll just put it on the card. That's a false promise. And then the idea that a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands, I'll get to it later, that's not going to matter, but it does matter. Quit hitting the snooze alarm. The first 5 verses, you've got to get busy and do not stop until you remedy this situation. There's a false expectation that this day of payment is not going to arrive. And then there's a personification of all of this, that there is poverty like a vagabond. And the idea is that it is steadily stalking the lazy, unproductive life that overextends its credit. Like a vagabond, it's just steadily walking towards you, and one day it will overtake you. And then the armed man, scarcity will come with great force. It's going to come like an armed man, like a robber, like a thug, like an attacker, and it's going to get you. And then you're going to be in a position that you don't want to be in. The ant is an illustration of common sense about having a busy, productive life. They are self-motivated. They plan ahead. They prepare. They gather. And when the time of need comes, they're all right. That's just ants. Watch them work. They're always so busy. You know how I know? Because every time I want to go cook something on the grill, they show up. Go to the ant, O sluggard. Look how busy they are, and learn a lesson about that. This is all done in the presence of God. First, he talks about this worthless person. This would tie in with the beginning of the chapter. Someone who hasn't paid attention, hasn't done it the right way, doesn't have the good work ethic. Here is the worthless person, beginning in verse 12. A worthless person, a wicked man, is the one who walks with a perverse mouth, who winks with his eyes, who signals with his feet, who points with his fingers, who with perversity in his heart continually devises evil, who spreads strife. Therefore his calamity will come suddenly. Instantly he will be broken, and there will be no healing. Can you see him? It's that smart aleck guy, that arrogant guy. He's winking with his eyes, he's got his gestures, he's pointing with his hands. He's going to outsmart everybody. This is the guy who's got the world by the tail. He's different from everybody else. It's not going to catch him. He's going to stay one step ahead and outsmart everybody. He's playing the games and he's taking advantage. He has selfish interest at the expense of others. This whole section about money, about credit, about shortcuts in life, about being lazy, wanting to live in luxury, flim-flamming your way through life, it's all lived out in the presence of God. The all-seeing eye of God is watching it all. Verse 16. There are 6 things which the Lord hates, yes, 7 which are an abomination to Him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that run rapidly to evil, a false witness who utters lies, and one who spreads strife among brothers. What we love and what we hate defines our character. These are the things God hates. If we hate those things like God hates them, we won't behave in life in ways like that. We will learn lessons from passages like this. Each one is going to give an account to God. There are consequences in this life, and there are consequences in eternity. The way we live life is a God issue, and that's what we're training our children in while they're in the home. We're training them the way you decide to live, the way you decide to talk, the way you decide to work, how you look at value and money, and God is the giver of all good things. All of this is a God issue. We're training them in godliness. That's the bottom line of all of this. God's the creator, and He's the one behind all of this, and He's guaranteeing just reward for wisdom and for folly. And all of this is played out in front of Him. And that's what we want our children to realize, that when they leave the home, they're not just leaving the sight of mom and dad and thinking, okay, now I can get away with stuff. Now I can try all the stuff mom and dad never wanted me to do. Now I can experiment in all of that. They're still under the eye of God. It's about godliness. God's still watching. And just because it's not mom and dad and you're not having to come home at curfew and be accountable to them, you're still accountable to God. He's watching, and He will reward according to wisdom and folly, both in this life and the life to come. I'll close our lesson this evening with that familiar passage again. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment, with a promise, so that it may be well with you, and that you may live long on the earth. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. And by the way, do not provoke your children to anger doesn't mean your children aren't ever going to be angry at you. They're not going to like a lot of stuff. That's why they're children and you're the parent. You're not there to be their best buddy. You're there to teach them and equip them with godliness. And sometimes they'll like it and sometimes they won't, but let them learn the lessons while they're young. And later they'll figure out how much you love them and how much you've given them. This is one of the pitfalls in life that we need to train our children in. How to have a good work ethic. How to understand value. And the blessings that God gives us are a matter of stewardship. And we need to be responsible with it. I hope that no one has got themselves in some kind of a fix because they wandered off the path of godliness, but sometimes it happens. But we can come back. God's made a way for us to come back, to repent, to be restored to faithfulness. And there may be some who have not yet put the Lord on in the waters of baptism. And if you're a regular with us or have been regular with us for some time, you've heard that. Baptism, baptism, baptism. And you might be wondering why it's such a big deal. Well, if you really want to know, you need to invest in a Bible study. One-on-one. Or couple with couple. You need to invest in some Bible study time. To sit down once a week, open Bible together on a table, and begin a methodical study of some Bible subjects. and you will come to understand why it's such a big deal. It's because it's a big deal to God. God made it a big deal. And there's a lot tied to it, a lot that dovetails into it so that it has meaning and it has a lasting effect in life if you understand it. Maybe that's what your request would be tonight. I need to study. Whatever it is, we are here to help. We are here to encourage, and we hope we can do that tonight. And if you need to respond to the invitation, we do invite you to come forward as we stand and sing together.